Dear friends, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I will never forget the day Ebrahim Golestan handed me a plain manila envelope with 15 of Forugh Farrokhzad's letters tucked inside. A shiver raced up and down my spine. My pulse quickened. My palms dampened. Trapped in the space between disbelief and delight, my breath quivered. For decades, I had wanted to have access to these letters. I had taken several trips to Bolney in England to fetch them, unsuccessfully. And now, finally, I had the letters in my hands. For 50 years, Mr. Golestan had kept his silence, never revealing a word about his relationship with one of the most renowned poets of modern Iran. Finally, he had agreed to unlimited interviews with me and was now handing me a treasure trove of previously unpublished documents. The letters did not disappoint. The prose was beautiful, spontaneous. It was unguarded and intimate. They carried the sharp musing of a curious traveler who was no accidental tourist. Much like her poetry, they laid bare her deepest emotions, dreams, and nightmares. They uncovered a profound and boundless curiosity about the literary and cinematic currents of the world. In just 15 letters, Farrokhzad discussed many films she had seen in Europe, several museums she had visited, many European filmmakers she had met and engaged with. She wrote of her plans and evolving ideas on cinema and literature with the same passion and insight that infused her poetry. The letters also revealed the power dynamics within this relationship and in its historical context. Farrokhzad often expressed her admiration for Golestan, positioning herself as his mentee and his devoted admirer. With a deeply reverential, at times worshipful tone, she praised him, sought his support and guidance, longed for his approval. But most striking of all, the letters unveiled a profound fusion of the personal and the intellectual, reshaping our understanding of a relationship that for long was framed as either an illicit love affair or as a tale of Golestan's influence over Forugh Farrokhzad. The letters shattered this long-held narrative, proving that their bond extended beyond romantic or sexual love and was rooted in profound understanding and a shared appreciation of each other's artistic aspirations and sensibilities. They offered an unparalleled glimpse into a period of extraordinary creative and personal transformation, not only for Farrokhzad, but also for Ibrahim Golestan. More than just unfiltered outpourings of a soul yearning, longing, loving, the letters uncovered an intense artistic partnership. Though Golestan's letters to Farrokhzad remain inaccessible to this day, perhaps we will have them in the archive, but these letters by themselves stand as a testament to a relationship that defied convention and gave birth to some of the most beautiful poems, short stories, films, and influential ideas in modern Iran. Thankfully preserved, shared, published, and now archived at the Stanford Green Library, these letters are an essential part of Farrokhzad's rich legacy, offering a rare glimpse into her life and revealing aspects of her relationship with Golestan that are absent from her poetry and from the public perception of their relationship. From her teenage years until her untimely death at the age of 32, Farrokhzad was an avid and prolific letter writer. As you know, I believe she was an architect of threshold spaces in Iranian literature, more than any other writer or poet that I know. She left behind a rich collection of correspondence that offers deeper insight into her work and inner world. Though so far 110 of her letters have been published, I know for a fact that there are many others that are unpublished. Yet, Farrokhzad never fades into silence. She pulls aside curtains, steps through locked doorways, defies red lines, and surfaces again and again in the most unexpected times and places. But Farrokhzad's letters continue a long-standing tradition of using letters as a powerful tool for those on the margins of Iranian society. Throughout history, letters have offered an accessible channel for articulation, connection, and resistance, a means of preserving identity in the face of brutal elimination. Let me give you an example. The epistolary culture of the early Babi and Baha'i communities in Iran. With the Bab and Baha'u'llah exiled to remote regions or banished altogether from their country, letters became a primary lifeline, connecting them to their followers. Beyond specific works in both Babi and Baha'i religion, a good part of Babi and Baha'i literature consists of letters addressed to individuals or communities. In the Baha'i terminology, they're referred to as tablets. While many of the letters of the early Babis, unfortunately, in particular, Tahir Qurratul Ain, in whose life and work I've been very interested, have been lost, destroyed in the waves of repression that sought to silence them. Later, 5 minutes? It's not wrong? No? Okay. 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 I thought I had time myself. Okay. So I will cut and try to condense it in 5 minutes. So maybe I should talk to make it in 5 minutes. So I've been really pleasantly surprised by the incredible contribution of Babi and Baha'i women to the social welfare of Iranians, men and women, but in particular gender relations. For instance, thanks to Dr. Ali Delgosha, who lives in Iran, I learned about a woman, Tayire, and I know Dominique Brookshaw is also working on these early pioneering women. She wrote 7 of the 50 letters authored by women in Iranian No periodical. That's 13% of all the letters written by women. I have been surprised by these letters. There is no mention of religion. Of course, it wouldn't have been published if she had announced her faith. But it's all about education, about health, about women's need to work outside the home. It's all about desegregation. It's all about inside and outside. But Babi and Baha'i women are not the only one. The Iranian Jewish community has also tremendously helped us have a part of our history that has been unfortunately silenced, covered with a thick veil. We have already heard about the magnificent work of my childhood friend, Homa Aziz Sarshar. I want to tell you very briefly about the work of another truly wonderful Iranian novelist, Jina Nahai. If you have not read her book, Moonlight on the Avenue of Fate, I highly recommend this book. I have taught this book for 30 years. I think it came out in 1991. And I have taught it every year for a variety of reasons. But it was only when I started thinking about letters, thanks to the invitation to be in this conference, that a whole new aspect of this wonderful book by Jina Nahai became clear to me. At the core of this novel is a letter that the protagonist, the narrator, Lily, writes. Lily is a girl who would like to discover her ancestry. She realizes that once these women were full of magic and mystery, and that they are now, the beautiful word she uses, I think, gurgling whispers. And she says that Lily started writing on her skin. She would push the pen into her skin, writing because she wanted to become visible to the outside world. But of course, this was private. Nobody quite saw it. And a turning point in the novel is when Lily decides to write a letter. It's a short letter that she mails. Lily, Roxana, please. 3-word letter. But the mailing of this letter becomes a turning point in the novel. It leads to at least to the best of my knowledge in Iranian literature, It's the first book written by a Jewish woman about the life of Jews in Iran, and of course later in California. And it is truly a magnificent contribution. Quickly also, the wonderful book by Bahiyeh Nakhjavani, The Saddleback. It's her debut novel. It's all about letters that are not delivered to their intended recipient. Again, if you have not read the work of Bahiyeh Nakhjavani, I think she is truly a gift to Iranian literature in diaspora. To quickly say, because, 0 minutes, okay. Then I will stop. Sorry, I don't have time to read my conclusion, but thank you very much.
10 years ago, when I stand here and talking about the Iranian writers in search of meaning and awareness, I was a part of this past. I'm still in. But the experience that I lived during the last 10 years was about how writing under censorship, prohibition, and actually the situation in Iran that we should write under, that we have to write under that, can affect on your work as a writer. My first and second novel was banned in Iran. In a situation that I had one of the greatest women that I knew in my life, Shahla Lahiji, was beside of me, and she was a real fighter against censorship. But even with her effort, we couldn't publish that two novels. After that, I published my third novel, Chehelum, and after that, another novels about killing by murder, killing by honor, or other problems which Iranian women faced in contemporary Iran, especially in last 2 decades, which was one of the most turbulent part of our history. And during these years, every time that I published any of my novel, when I was look at them, I couldn't read them because there was something wrong inside me. I felt that there is something wrong and I cannot enjoy this novel. I never read any of my novel after publishing. And I feel that there's something which is not original and pure in them. It takes a long time that I figured out that it is unconsciously censorship, and I became the hands of censorship system in my novels. Actually, the time that I accept that they remove one chapter of one of my novel, The Story of Eve, which was about killing women by honor, by the name of honor. And this chapter was about female circumcision. And I accepted to remove this because they didn't let me to publish this. And also they asked me, you should change the end of this novel. Your main character shouldn't be die. She has to be live and living this beautiful life in Iran. And I accepted. I ashamed to say that I accepted because I was young and I wanted to publish my novel, and the audience was important for me. And after that time, it takes a long time that I could actually be again that rebel and fearless girl that I brought my novel to the Shahla Lahiji Roshangaran publication, and that time they banned my novel. And I wrote this novel, The Assembly of Forgotten, Majma Faramushan, which is the first novel after 8 novels that I wrote, which I can stand behind of this because it's the purest and original story that I could write. The things that I wanted to speak about, it's Iranian writer, Iranian women writer, in my generation, has a very different situation of the maybe the other all other words, because they are unconsciously writing under this suppression, and you cannot say that it's not affect on your story. The things that I try to say to my students at the creative writing courses is that you should write your, if you wanted to be a good storyteller, you should should tell your original story. And it doesn't happen until that you become a rebel, like the first time that you wanted to be a writer. The first time that I wanted to be a writer, I was 8 years old. And that time I was a rebel. But I lost it with working under the censorship in Iran. But it's the part of my life that I decided to write this novel the exact way that I want, which it was based off my researches and also knowing these people, which I write about them in this novel. It's about two old friends, Imran and Hamid, which they are living before Iran Revolution, and also we can see their life during this 50 years. We can say that one of them, in symbolic way, got stuck in coma under Bahman, which is in our beautiful Persian language is the same name of the months that revolution happened. And the other one is exiled, actually. And the other characters, some of them are actually killed in Iran-Iraq war. And the other character, which they left their homeland, and any other stories, which is symbolic, in symbolic ways, shows the Iranian life before and after revolution. Definitely, this novel is banned in Iran, and I published this novel at in London with my mentor's advice, Dr. Milani, at the Mehri publication. But the mission after that, I thought that it's in my mission to follow that, is that when you are even publishing a novel which is banned in Iran, you will lose a lot of audience access. So after this story, and also after losing Shahla Lahiji last year, which she tried about 20 years for me become a good writer and put a lot of effort for my career, I decided to start a program which name is Sepidar, to introduction other women writers in Iran, which their works is banned. And also as an editor in Roshangaron and a judge of a short story festival at American Premier University, I learned about the other young women writers, which they are extraordinary, brave and fearless to talking about their body, their rights and their thoughts. And it's really amazing, because I think the wheels of change actually affected of this woman. And I believe that our future in Iran will happen with these women's works. So as I'm here, I wanted to say that the stories are a very important part of our history. Because, for example, at the Assembly of Forgotten, all these people that you can see their photos are real people, actually, which my friends, which was a great graphist to design this cover, choose real photos of the people. Some of them are in this story. For example, the middle picture is the Imran, the real Imran, which always had a lot of hope for Iran, and he really tries to change anything that he can. And the other characters too, like Safi, which killed in Iran-Iraq war. The things that I wanted to say today here, which was a big honor being beside of the big names in these panels, is that I continue this work, but I have a plan to work about the Iranian women writers and their lives and their career during two last decades, because I experienced that and I wanted to write about if you wanted to be a woman writer in Iran, you just don't need to be a writer. You can learn everything to being a writer, but beside of that, you have to be a big fighter. Because writing in Iran now, it's not just writing, it's a battle. And I think we can win this battle. Thank you.
The American feminist Kate Millett arrived in Tehran just after the Iranian Revolution and just before the Persian New Year. Spring had sprung, and for the nation, the vision of an unpresentable future, a future never seen before, was within grasp. On March 8, 1979, less than 2 months after the revolution, International Women's Day celebrations were being held in Iran. This was the first time in over 50 years. Millett received an invitation to be one of the event's international speakers, and she was the only Western speaker to arrive. Millett had been called the Mao Zedong of the women's liberation movement by Time magazine in 1970. Her manifesto, Sexual Politics, which had been published in the summer of that year, circulated as the capital of the women's movement. Traveling to Iran with her partner, the journalist Sophie Keir, $1,200 worth of film and audio recording equipment, a duffel bag full of clothes and books, and no money to spare, Millett was burdened with technology and distracted at every turn by it. Newspaper clippings from Tehran show Millett with a portable cassette recorder in hand, into which she whispered her observations. Her audio cassettes, manufactured to pick up all sound, captured an unconscious auditory landscape, the sentiments of Iranian women everywhere. Millett's whisper tapes thus store the spectacular soundscape of an unfettered, imaginative, and flickering moment of verve in Iran until the final order of her expulsion by the Iranian interim government on March 18, 1979. Millett's tapes are in many ways monuments to the articulation of a presence she recognized as the beginning of the women's movement in Iran, and in her estimation, the first record of an independent feminist movement in the Muslim world. Women from around the world were invigorated by the energy of what she witnessed, the movement's vitality, its resistance, its resilience, the courage of Iranian women with whom she joined in 6 days of protest. They are the most polished feminists I've ever seen, Millett said of the Iranian women at a press conference when she returned to New York City. They fought the shot, the risk of their lives. Those marches were the whole spirit of the insurrection. The exhilarating charge in Millett's voice over the international telephone lines, woven into the soundscape that engulfed her as she reported her daily encounters in Iran to feminist comrades all around the world, quite literally woke the international women's movement up from its sleep. For them, there was a persuasive eloquence in the chants of the Iranian women that they only provisionally understood. Azadi na sharqi ist, na gharbi ist, jahani ist. And this unpresentable vision, wrapped around a kernel of sound, stirred them into action. Freedom is neither Eastern nor Western, it is planetary. Galvanized women flocked together to organize and support. Duke University houses Millett's archives and the whisper tapes. The tapes were meant to capture Millett's voice, to make a record of what she saw for her book on Iran. But there is an unconscious layer to her conscious recorded voice that sometimes speaks of things beyond what Millett could comprehend. Beneath the whispers, the formidable cries, the unyielding demands, the captivating debates, of Iranian men and women. The voices I hear on the tapes in the archive are acousmatic, that is, incorporeal, bodiless. As I listen, the clicking sound of Sophie Kier's Nikon camera and her intermittent commentary on the things she's capturing on film as she walks next to Millet anchors the acousmatic voices to spaces, bodies, objects, and surrounding Millet. The click of the camera, in other words, grounds the voices and the sounds I hear to images I have studied for over 40 years. Images of men and women in revolt. The victorious celebration of Ayatollah Khomeini's return as the leader of the revolution and the women's protests that followed upon his ascent. As the auditory unconscious of Millet's own voice, the tapes thus serve as a soundscape for the streets and squares of the revolution. As such, they reveal a weave of everyday life. They record the slogans, the demands, the conversations of men and women as they engage deeply with political debates at Tehran University, participate in street marches, rallies, press conferences, chant their slogans at the state-owned television station, outside the foreign ministry and inside the grand hall of the Ministry of Justice, and sit down to strategize, debrief, or just relax in various rooms, restaurants, automobiles, settings where I can hear the banter, the laughter, the mockery, the conviviality, and threats, as well as the solidarity between men and women. Focusing closely on the soundscape of Millet's tapes, it is the voices of these women that emerge for me as capable of resuscitating the theoretical and political possibilities of a feminism vanquished by identity politics, a politics of recognition that is today wholly divorced from a transformative, collective, and redistributive planetary struggle. Within days of Millet's arrival to Iran on March 6, 1979, Khomeini made a religious decree that all women working in the nation's ministries should wear a full-length veil. 3 days earlier, Iran's post-revolutionary interim government, led by Prime Minister Mehdi Bazargan, had declared women too emotional to be judges. The 1967 Family Protection Act, which made polygamy conditional on the consent of a man's first wife and divorce accessible to both men and women in civil courts, was summarily retracted. Barely 5 weeks into Khomeini's return from exile, women had already had enough. Seeing their liberties waning, they flocked to the streets in outrage. As women's cries for freedom and the street demonstrations displaced the planned celebrations on the campus of Tehran University on March 8th, Millet set about making a record. She positioned herself as an archivist or a historian eager to monumentalize the formation of an independent women's movement and an international feminist movement with its kernel in the revolutionary activities of women in Iran. None of the equipment that Millet brought to Iran was meant to produce an investigative report. The hell with the media's version of reality, she says. A movement is being born in Iran. Posing as a historian of the international women's movement, Millet marvels at the possibility and the instantaneity of the document to be both the event and to also have the long-aspired capacity to narrate, to account for the event, to be, as women, as feminists, finally independent, self-enclosed. Yet, as I listen, what is absolutely certain is that the sound equipment will malfunction at any moment. Sounds disappear and reappear. The microphone is covered by fabrics and leather bags. Batteries go dead, speeding up voices and sounds. Tapes run out and conversations continue from side A to B. Kier announces that she needs help changing film, and she and Millet move away from a still ongoing conversation in Persian, which I'm completely wrapped up in, to avoid being jolted. I'll never know, for example, if that woman to whom I was listening as she loudly debated a man in the courtyard of the university managed to convince him to join forces with the women and protest the obvious censorship of women's demands from national television. As Millet moves away from their voices, the cries of a massive crowd fill my headphones from a far distance. Their voices denounce the head of national Iranian radio and television, Sadegh Qutbzadeh. When Millet and Kira are done changing film, a group of men and women have staged a photo op for the press with a big sign in both Persian and English reading, "We want equal rights." I can hear Akir's still camera clicking and winding. The ability to rewind, re-record, fast forward on a handheld recording device connects times and otherwise disjointed spaces. This happens on the tapes as I listen. The unwinding and fast forwarding of tapes unmoor the predictability of the things I take as tangibles, things we all take for granted. This moment, that time, this person, that space. Spaces and places appear and disappear, sometimes randomly, because of the technology itself. A rewinding of this sort occurs in one of the most stunning documentaries from the revolutionary period. It is the 1979 Baraye Azadi, in which the Shah's opulent coronation is played in reverse. The monumentalized time of the Shah's reign is scrambled in the film. The recording technologies that the people have appropriated for the revolution are used not only to capture the crowds in revolt, but also now to disrobe the Shah of his stolen riches. Losing their objective distance from the events that they are recording and to their chronological sequence by the press of a fast-forward button, Millet's tapes upend the earthbound qualities of inscription, preservation, and monumentalization, and reassign to these supposedly archival technologies other properties associated with erasure and ephemerality, measures of flux that in social cultural terms are deeply connected with the sea change of upheaval and revolution. In my listening too, Millet's process of documentation is marred by the novelty and the spectacle of the lightweight technology. I wonder if the technology isn't distracting Millet, distancing her from precisely the things she shouldn't be missing as the historian of a burgeoning women's movement as she sees it. Her senses are overextended by the technology. She seems more inattentive to the ideas that are foreign to her, concepts that she can't swallow, those to do with religion. For what Millet hears in the chants is the fierceness, the valor of the women shouting down Islamic prejudice. What she hears is the beginning, is women beginning the revolution again. But as I listen in, what is present in the auditory unconscious of Millet's own voice and elusive to Millet herself is the women's insistence on their movement's continuity with the Iranian Revolution, their desire to maintain a vision of a nation that is both free and bound to the life of the spirit. On the grounds of Tehran University on March 12, 1979, when Millet meets the journalist and filmmaker Terry Graham, himself a Sufi and a longtime resident in Iran, Graham immediately underscores the international character of the women's movement and its address to a global patriarchy. He's keenly conscious of the Iranian women's movement as one for which religion speaks, to quote Michel Foucault, less of a hereafter than of the transfiguration of the world. For the Iranian Revolution, as for the women who were crying on behalf of freedom all around Millet, the effort was to lift the fearful weight of the entire world order. As such, for Graham, the women's demonstrations are the continuation of the revolution and not a draconian return to Islam, but the most modern form of revolt against a global system of injustice, with Iran situated at the center of a future international federation. as long as the nations become stepping stones for higher things, and Iran itself becomes a federation, it's interesting, he reflects, that it's also Islamic, because women's movements in the West have been anti-religious. It's really profound. Women I've found who say, I'm Islamic. I can tell that he has lost Millet already. She's distracted by her tape recorder, fiddles with it, and asks Graham if he wants to hear himself speak. I get frustrated. Millet's attention has misfired, and she overlooks an opportunity to engage with what might be one of the most pressing questions for a still embryonic international women's movement: how to deal with profound alterity, the chasm between beliefs, experiences, spirit, even as Millet perceives similarities in the demands that are being forwarded by the women around her. To me, this is crucial. I swear I'm almost done. At the heart of the women's collective demand is the desire for a planetary transformation. The voices of the Iranian women arrive at a resolute will to leap, to give up the known in order to gain the unknown. In this moment of revolutionary passion, I hear Iranian women courageously take on the militant men with whom they have fought a revolution as an act historically unlike that of any other radicalized women's group. Veiled and unveiled, the women dare to stand once again at the risk of both death and extinction for the freedoms they have fought and the victory that they have celebrated, prematurely perhaps, together with their brothers. The women's radicalized voices on these tapes speak to me of a telepoesis, of a will to cross into a self none of them could have ever imagined, becoming, and to do so on behalf of an as yet unseen future for all. Azadi na sharqi ist na gharbi ist, jahani ist. Freedom is neither Eastern nor Western, it is planetary. On March 16, 1979, at the Intercontinental Hotel, preparing for her one-woman press conference on the rumors of her expulsion from Iran, Millet sings to herself a little chanson about the roses of Esfahan in their mossy sheaths. Turning to discuss with Kira the plane route that she would need to take to leave the country and enter the United States as a Canadian, Millet huffs, nation states, how do we evolve beyond this crap? It may be, as Graham was attempting to convey to Millet earlier, that Iran's revolt against the global system, an insurrection that Foucault would refer to as the most modern and the most insane, had in mind precisely this evolution of the planet, an evolution of the highest order. Distracted, Millet wanted to rewind the tape and listen to her unfinished recording of Graham instead. What would it take to make that resolute revolutionary leap into the open air of profound alterity, I ask myself, and take off my headphones. Thank you.
Amongst the history of women in the Middle East, the history of Iranian Jewish women is shrouded in mystery until the very recent past. Due to gender and religious minorities, their activity, much like their rights, were not significant enough for historians, poets, or other compatriots to take notice. It is assumed that much of their responsibilities lay in the role of a mother, homemaker, and preserving the Jewish rituals and traditions throughout the centuries. Prior to the 20th century, the only references throughout the centuries we hear is the two Iranian Jewish women, Queen Esther, wife of King Xerxes during the Achaemenids, and Shushan-Dokht, wife of Yazdegerd I during the Sassanids. Although we read about Queen Esther in the Old Testament, there is no Judaic record about Shushan-Dokht due to the ban of intermarriage imposed upon Jews at the time of their return to Jerusalem by Ezra in the fear of assimilation. It's not until the 17th century that we begin to hear references to Iranian Jewish women through the eyes of male Judeo-Persian poets. Even in this instance, the point of their reference is about their clothing or general positions in the community, and at some point during the time of forced conversions, asking for amnesty from Shah Abbas II by way of his mother. Or another of a poet of the 17th century who had apparently had a very bad experience in marriage, trying to warn his son from being attached to a woman in a long satirical poetic stanzas, advising him that, "O my heart, come and listen to me, you the light of my soul. If you do not wish to be buried without a shroud, never touch your heart to a woman. If her face resembles to the moon, her sweet lips are like sugar. Take my words, my beloved son. Never attach your heart to a woman." Historical sources of the 19th century talk about the daughter of Fath Ali Shah, Shah Begum, known as Zia-ul-Sultaneh, who was described as his favorite, someone who was born to a Jewish mother named Maryam, one of the 27 Jewish wives of Fath Ali Shah. Zia-ul-Sultaneh was known for being very well educated, a poetess, and familiar with French language. It is reported that she was the confidant of her father in his correspondence with foreign leaders, including Napoleon I. It is not until the 20th century that we begin to hear not only of Iranian Jewish women group, but a few names of individual women, including the women's Zionist groups of Hamadan and Tehran, and their names of their leaders. Upon the establishment of Tehran University in 1934, we have both the names of Maliheh Yashar, who received her license as a midwife in 1943, and Azizeh Bral, who received a doctorate degree in pharmacology from Tehran University in 1945. In 1947, the Jewish Ladies Organization of Iran was established in Tehran to directly address the medical and economic needs of Jewish women living in Tehran, in Tehran's ghetto. This organization, with the financial support of American Joint Organization and their tireless efforts, was able to expand beyond Tehran to many other major Iranian cities with their orphanages and vocational classes for mothers. The organization still exists in Iran and has been active in Los Angeles under the name of Iranian Jewish Women's Organization since 1976, with a different agenda, mainly focusing on the preservation of the dual identity of the Iranian Jewish community, as well as the impact and the role of women in society. By the 1950s, further charitable endeavors were followed, such as Hatef Women's Organization and the women chapter of Ort Vocational Schools. Parvin Motamed, a graduate of these schools, was later appointed as one of the 5 members of the executive board of the World Ort International. Between the 1950s and 1970s, we can find Iranian Jewish women becoming more active, not only philanthropically, but in the fields of medicine, humanities, journalism, writing, and art. Their list is quite long, having one of them today sitting with us, Mrs. Homa Sarshar, who belongs to that category. Although the minor adjustments were made for women, first regarding women's inheritance right in 1966, and second, the ability to obtain civil divorce due to the 1975 Family protective law, Iranian Jewish women legally and religiously were still treated with the Talmudic and halachic rules and rituals. Even such minor legal changes were rescinded following the 1979 revolution. The abrogation of the family protection law for all women and the reinstatement of the law of apostasy, which prioritized awarding inheritance to a Muslim heir, regardless of the deceased's religion, were among them. At present, the Jewish women who have stayed in Iran are required to wear the hijab, just like all other women in the country. The required permission of a spouse or a father for a woman to leave the country, which existed prior to the revolution, still is needed. But for the Iranian Jewish women who left Iran, their opportunities largely varied based upon where they immigrated to. For those who came to California, they achieved greater rights, much than those they had experienced in Iran, including the community property law, the right to a civil divorce for those who could not get a religious divorce known as get by an Iranian rabbi. Apart from Iranian Orthodox Jewish communities, women enjoy some rights as men, including mixed sitting in congregations, presidency of congregations, and mainly in American conservative and reform temples, having roles as cantors and even being a rabbi for a large congregation. The list of the accomplishments of Iranian Jewish women in this country is quite impressive. It ranges from different fields of humanities, medicine, high academic positions, Qualcomm electrical engineering, aerospace electronics, computer engineering stimulating the autopilot stim for Boeing jets, to holding vice presidential position in international organizations, co-founding non-political voting organizations, and in civil services, presidential appointment, and even elected to local government. In the meantime, there is a large group of dedicated women who are active in philanthropic and social organizations as well. But let us see why there has not been any record of Jewish women throughout history. The role of women in any society forms half of their culture and historical heritage. How many untold stories of women has never been recorded, mainly because they were not considered as a vital part of a community. Unfortunately, even to this date, many of such women are still restricted by ancient religious laws, cultural and family barriers, some of which may take decades and generations to overcome. As Jewish women living abroad, we have the dual responsibility. First, toward all Iranian women living in Iran, and second, toward Jewish women who want to be a part of their community without being tied to the ancient restrictions still held especially by Orthodox Iranian rabbinic community and traditional conservative values. Yes, it's important to record all the accomplishments and success of our women for the next generation to know. Unfortunately, there are many of them, but also to record the issues and problems they have faced. It is important to know that half of the load of immigration to a new land, both for all of them Iranians, has been on the shoulders of women. If we have maintained our Jewish and Iranian heritage in a new land with different cultural values, it has been through the role of mothers and grandmothers. if our children speak Persian while they are dragged to Hebrew school every Sunday morning, the chore is mainly on the shoulders of the mother. Yet, let's not forget the role of the new generation of husbands and fathers who, as an Iranian man, have broken the tradition of not helping in the domestic and parenthood duties. We are grateful, now I can say that, we're grateful to the Iranian Studies program and Green Library at Stanford University for their efforts to provide a home and an archive about Iranian women in general, including that for Iranian Jewish women. Let's remember that no matter and at what position, all Jewish women pride themselves not only on their Jewish identity, but as an Iranian to their cultural heritage. Thank you. Now, with your permission, I have just a very few slides to show. Fine. This is only from one Iranian Jewish women organization. This is not all, but since I've been one of the founders and the only one alive, I get myself this permission. Just a couple of them. This is these Jewish ladies in Iran at the time of the ghetto. Again, that's the one. I go fast. You may recognize them. Then some of these elder ladies here in Los Angeles will be honored. And this is, we see, Board of the Iranian Jewish Women in Los Angeles throughout the years. We have celebrations, our Jewish heritage. We name it after Mrs. Malih Kashfi. We have a Woman of the Year award named after Mrs. Shamsi Hekmat. And we have Mother's Day introducing Women of the Year. I cannot point it at the left point. You see Mrs. Sarshar as one of them. It was in 1991. At that time, we used to honor mothers and women together. This is another Mother's Day of the year. Am I going backwards? No. This is Nowruz celebration. We celebrate our Iranian heritage. If you see, they have scenes here with both Iranian and Judaic symbols. And this is one of our efforts to amend the Jewish divorce law in California. We have not been very successful, unfortunately. We don't get the cooperation from our Iranian rabbis. We don't. And I said to my students, I talk in the discussion about it, installation ceremonies, the presidents come and go. And this is some new, younger chapter of our organization and their activities. We dedicated a big donation to UCLA Hillel at UCLA, so we see we were honored there. This is the Iranian ladies in Iran who are still going on. You see, they do things for children, they do for senior citizens. They named their stadium after the name of Janet Kwanzaa there. And this is our latest group. Last year in Los Angeles, they had an art exhibition here and some wellness activities here. I just want to, can I have 1 minute to go through these names? Yes or no? Yeah. Huh? Okay, just these ladies, I put their names on there. I really should name them. Mrs. Shamsi Hekmat, Malih Kashfi, their titles, I don't know. That's Bral, Mrs. Yashar, Parveen Mohamed, Mahine Amid, who is a poetess, Dr. Mahmoud Shafi, professor at NYU. This is the young lady who is a computer science head of the department at UC Berkeley. And this is Shima Zakhor in avionics with aerospace with NASA. And this is Kermani with computer again. Thank you so much.
I'm a scholar of women in politics, and so what I'm going to share is actually part of a larger project that I'm doing on institutionalization of women's rights in Iran, as well as within its neighbors of Afghanistan and Turkey as well. I'm a visiting scholar with CDDRL, which is the Center on Democracy, Development, and Rule of Law. And so what you will be seeing is some of the news clippings and some of the work that I was able to do with very generous support from Dr. Gheraglu, who was able to provide me with some of these archives. So as a scholar, I was very much interested on sort of the topic of women's political rights. And although I'm not a historian, I'm a political scientist, I have a big appreciation, obviously, for historical lens and historical analysis. And that's because also what was already said is that the protests that we see today, such as the Women Life Freedom protest that erupted in 2022, as well as the long-term sort of civil disobedience that we're seeing, a lot of these have their roots in decades, if not generations prior, right? So this is how we know that movements build on other movements. And in fact, when you have bold, resilient women standing up to systemic discrimination and gender apartheid, this definitely ends up motivating many others. Iran also benefits from having a very long history of a strong feminist mobilization, where women have not necessarily been silent about not having access to some of their basic rights, and they have campaigned and they have organized for many of these rights, and they have been on occasion successful, although it came at an extremely high cost. So with regards to women's political rights is the right that, of course, as I said, is very close to my heart. And by women's political rights, I mean women's right to elect and be elected to political office. It is considered one of the most fiercely contested set of rights globally, not just in Iran. And in fact, people have lost their lives for this. People have lost their freedoms for this. And there's a number of different reasons for that, particularly because this is the set of rights that's very much directly linked to personhood as well as citizenship. And in fact, there's a large gap across the world, including in Iran, including in the United States, for instance, where you had the universal male suffrage and then you had the universal suffrage, right? So there's been a big gap. With Iran's gap, it's actually 52 years. So more than half a century, we had basically women, it just took that long for women's citizenship rights to be recognized. The other aspect of this right is that not only do they aspect the political authority, but as well as they impact other aspects of women's rights. For instance, right to education. The other thing that also makes this set of rights particularly controversial for male-dominated and conservative settings like in Iran is that it's one of those set of rights that actually grants women authority over men, not only in terms of elections where you can actually vote someone out of office, but also in terms of once you become elected, you actually hold political power where men have to follow your rulings. And this is something that, again, doesn't sit right with many patriarchal sort of male-dominated settings. But at the same time, this is a set of rights that also quite transnational. That's because women historically have been marginalized from the political sphere regardless of where. So this has actually led to very sort of important solidarities across borders with one another. And that's another reason why suffrage, or women's right to vote, came in waves. Iran's was given at the latter end of its second wave. Okay, so very quickly, based on some of the research that I've been doing as part of my own scholarship, as well as what I was able to really gather from looking at particularly the news clippings of the archives that we have here at Stanford, I want to sort of show, particularly with what some of my co-panelists already talked about, is like reviving women's own voices as well within this struggle is something that's quite significant for us. So within the long struggle for women to have access to political rights, I consider that women in Iran faced a double bind in the sense that they faced fierce opposition to women's political rights, not just from the traditionalists, but also from the modernists. So on the one hand, the ulama, or the clergy, were fiercely opposed to women gaining these set of rights. They considered them un-Islamic. But then on the other hand, they also faced opposition from the modernists, particularly the willing modernists who were willing to sacrifice these set of rights in order for political expediency, right? We've had numerous occasions where you had modernists who were discussing sort of women's, the modern Iranian woman, the one who's a key member of the society, then go ahead and say, well, maybe it's not the right time to talk about women's political rights, when they wanted to sort of cozy up with more conservative, more nationalist forces. In response, women pressured for their demands strategically. So very quickly, I'm going to talk about these three sort of factors as part of their struggle. They founded relevant institutions and engaged in knowledge production. They engaged in tactical framing processes, and what I mean by that is they were very tactful with how they articulated this particular demand in order to make this demand from the ruling elites, as well as they ensured very much transnational connection and networkings, which I think the last, Dr. Pirnazar was able to sort of show us of how important that was in order to be very well connected with many others. So a very quick timeline of women's struggle for female suffrage is that it dates back at least to Iran's constitutional revolution of 1906 to 1911, where despite women's very active participation within the constitutional revolution and very clearly demanding to say, hey, we would like to have political rights, unfortunately in 1911, the parliament passed universal male suffrage. So women were not included. The first Pahlavi states feminism project, which is referred to as Women's Awakening, was again a very prominent, very important moment in Iranian history where there was a lot of talk, again, creating that modern Iranian woman. Unfortunately, within his plans also did not include women's suffrage. What's also interesting about this era is that Reza Shah Pahlavi actually traveled to Turkey because he was very much inspired as well by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, and there was sort of a lot of exchanges there. Dr. Milani is sort of very much speaking and writing about that. And Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in Turkey under him was the first country in the region to have granted women the right to vote as early as 1934, but it does not extend to Iranian women once he came back. We did have women's rights organizations that publicly demand women's rights, among many other rights, particularly the right to education, particularly family rights. The second Pahlavi regime sought to simultaneously emancipate as well as restrict women. So we had sort of these shifts happen throughout the 1940s, 1950s, and 60s, where we had confined rejuvenations of women's organizing into groups and parties, to then gradual restrictions and eventual co-optation of the women's movement, which was very much part of the plan. And female suffrage was eventually recognized as part of the 1963 White Revolution reforms, which I will talk about as well. So yes, my interest with this project has obviously been to revive women's voices, because one thing that doesn't sit very well with me as a feminist scholar is when a major political and social shift happens in a country, in a context where women are now granted the right to vote, then sometimes the credit unjustly goes to the male political leaders, and then we forget the decades, if not, generations that fought for this beforehand. So I think it's really important for us to recognize it. So this is where some of those voices were the role of elite women. The women's movement in Iran at that time was not a mass movement. It was very much focused and at the forefront, where very much highly influential elite women. Many of them had personal connections to the ruling elites. Many of them came sort of from high upper class, and they were also highly educated as well as highly connected to the international community. So many of them were educated abroad, they traveled, and so on and so forth. There's also women's organizations where, again, they ranged from having autonomous women's organizations, such as the ones that were independent from the state, and then eventually they were forced to be state affiliated, but nonetheless, they still tried to figure out as much as they could to navigate sort of the patriarchal setting. These are the names of some of the institutions that I was very interested in, and I was able to find some really good sources on, such as the Hezb Zanan, or Women's Party, the New Path Society, as well as the High Council of Women's Organizations, and those are some of the individuals that we see from. So 1940s is the moment of sort of limited liberalization and the rise of radical women's voices. Not coincidentally, we see the pro-Soviet Tudeh party be at the forefront of very much advocating, as well as their women's branch, I should say, very much advocating women's political rights. 1943 is when the Hezb Zanan is created by Safiye Firuz, and 1944 is when one of the first really well-written bills is introduced in the Iranian parliament in order to grant women political rights. Unfortunately, it fails because the ulama come out very much strongly against it to say that it is un-Islamic. Some of the tactful framing that I was able to see as part of the news clippings that were at the time. So these are the statements of the women, the interviews that they were giving, sometimes even the statements. What ended up happening was they were articulating that, this is in line with the demands for the general equality while emphasizing motherhood and family. So for instance, there was a lot of discussions that female suffrage is in line with the larger demands for progress within the Iranian context, and that anybody who opposes it is holding medieval views. But it's also not in contradiction to Islam, but also that women were very clear to articulate that there's no way we'll have any set of sort of liberation or rights, particularly family rights, unless we also have political rights. And that's because they recognize that men were not going to grant women gender egalitarian sort of family rights, particularly the right to divorce, particularly other sort of rights. So for instance, in some of the statements from the Women's Party, we see that they're saying that one of the first things they would do once they enter the parliament is to grant equal rights in marriage and divorce, as well as they're saying that women cannot fulfill their motherhood responsibilities if they can just be divorced at will, right? So these are some of the things. The period of 1940s was quite short-lived in terms of sort of having that rejuvenation. 1950s and 60s included centralization and co-optation of women's organizations, where the state began to very much increasingly show little tolerance of any sort of independent or any independent entities, particularly women's organizations. So for instance, Women's Party was forced to change their name to the Women's Council to gesture loyalty to the Shah. Women's political rights became highly contested. This is the time where we also saw another set of bills being introduced. All of them ended up failing. And eventually we had the creation of the High Council of Women's Organizations under the presidency of Princess Ashraf. So this is where the umbrella organization was there to basically as a form of co-optation to make sure that all women's organizations are working there. So women still tried to figure out ways to navigate from within this very restrictive setting. And what I call in terms of the type of articulating that was happening was sort of diplomatic pressuring. For instance, this is an interview that was done in Kayhan by Mehri, Safiniya, the older sister of Houri, where the interviewer asks her, well, if you get the right to vote, then will you then, create your own women's party? And again, being a hizb or being a party was quite politicized at the time. And quickly she says, no, we don't want to create a party. We just want, the current parties that exist to open up the way for us so that we can go ahead and express some of our demands. And the two parties that she's referring to here is the sort of the party of the nationalists as well as the People's Party. This is when Iran was experimenting with a two-party system before it went to a single party rule, which was the Rastakhis. This is an article that I came across, which is in English, which I also really found interesting, the way it's articulated. It's like, men be aware. And it's showing, again, that same group of very elite, influential women actually taking a march onto the Senate in order to demand for women's political rights. When we look at the writings of this, you totally see the tone of extreme patriarchy and the extreme sense of threat that these particular elites faced with women demanding these rights, but again, they did not back down. So eventually, Okay, great. So yes, at the urging of the High Council, the Prime Minister Alam announces local elections to be open up to women. This is actually a tactic borrowed from many other cases where we had female suffrage granted, where local level politics is considered less political, and therefore it's actually easier to get women there with the hopes that the next round, they will be at the national level. Unfortunately, again, the ulama succeeded with canceling the permission of women participating in the local elections. Women in protest of the retreat, they did a sit-in as well as a statements of criticism. Just a few months later, in January of 1963, is when the Shah actually announces the White Revolution reforms, one of which is actually granting women political rights. The ulama come back and denounce them as un-Islamic, and this is when women hold a one-day strike where teachers, nurses, they just refuse to go to work. And so what becomes really interesting here is that although much of this organizing is sort of elite driven, they still have very organic connections to professional women that they are able to mobilize women on this day. And eventually the reforms are adopted in a national referendum, and in September of 1963, where for the first time in Iranian history, women participate in elections, and you have 6 women getting elected to the parliament and 2 are appointed to the Senate. One of the women who ends up getting appointed is Senator Mehrangiz Manouchehrian, who's the first ever Iranian female lawyer, as well as the one who ends up creating the family protection bill that we talked about. This is my second slide to the last. So very quickly, the transnational linkages and exchanges are also quite essential. My book documents some of this sort of transnational linkages as well, particularly within Iran and Turkey. But what's also very critical is that you see that this is where that transnational solidarity and even just being able to exchange knowledge and experiences with one another becomes really, really significant. For instance, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk actually announces women's right to vote in Turkey at an international conference that he decided to host with regards to female suffrage. So this is where that international setting, especially when you want to use this as a way to appeal to the West or to the international community. But within the Iranian context, we have the International Alliance of Women. For instance, this is a picture of them hosting them in 1960, as well as we know the International Women's Club that Houri Mostafi Moghadam was able to sort of be a president of. So where are we today? Unfortunately, Iran currently ranks among the lowest in the world in terms of women's parliamentary presence. It's actually ranked 176 out of 183 countries. And it has never reached its pre-revolutionary levels. The highest it's ever gotten has been close to 7%. So throughout the entire Majlis history, men's representation has been at least 93%. So this is just to wrap your minds around of how dire the situation is and has been and it's continuing to be. So lessons for the future is definitely the institutionalization of women's rights is absolutely significant. And I think more and more, there's research and there's a scholarship about how significant it is to just organize. And that also allows the dismantling of the patriarchal structures as well as the transnational linkages in the sense of recognizing that particularly at a time of patriarchal revival and democratic backsliding, it's really, really significant to not only preserve what we have, but also grow them. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much. It was fascinating talks, all of you. I have a question specifically to you, but anyone else can also respond. I'm wondering if anyone has done any research about Iran before Islam, because I am studying Islam and reading many books from many professors about Islam and fascism, but nobody talks about women at all in any 1,000 pages. It's not mentioned anything about women and women before Islam. And therefore, I always tell to everyone, Islam is not only fascism like any other fascism, is plus gender apartheid. I'm wondering if any one of you have studied before Islam, how was the situation for women in Iran? Because this is the way to push the fascism from Iran, push the Islam from Iran, to raise the awareness about women's situation before Islam in Iran.
Unfortunately, I have not done that research. No, as I said, I'm a political scientist. I'm trained as I'm an interdisciplinary scholar, but trained as a political scientist mostly. But I would say, just in general, just a comment that I would like to make about religion is that most religions that we have are patriarchal religions, and of course, gender equality is particularly within the dominant interpretations, and if you want to talk about conservative interpretations, is not there. But you do have a lot of women who are trying to have of a more sort of progressive interpretations of religion.
I can add a little bit, not much. Well, I told you about my research about Iranian Jewish women pre-Islam. But from what I know, during the Sassanids, we have the mother of Shapur II, Yifra Hormuz. She was a very, very powerful woman. In fact, she was pregnant on Shapur II when she was crowned. and she was a very powerful woman there. And then, of course, you know, Puran Dokhta Azar Midokh at the end. If I can think of anybody else. This comes more, but during the Achaemenids, these are mostly legends. I don't know any, I cannot give you any documentary. But definitely the mother of Shapur II was a very powerful woman that I know, and the last two, Iran Dokhto, Azar Midokh. If anybody else has anything.
Okay, please.
I just want to ask Dr. Milani to finish your conclusion.
Yes, please. Yeah, because we really missed it.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Yes, please.
I don't think we'll have time because we have to finish in about 15 minutes. But let me just thank you for doing that. I just used two of the theorists who have worked on letters, Jacques Lacan, who said every letter will eventually get to its destination. And of course, he was a theorist of the unconscious and the symbolic order. And Jacques Derrida, who said, in fact, there is a very good chance that letters might never get to their destination. They're deferred, they're delayed, they're intercepted, they might not get there. And my argument, my humble argument, was that letters are border crossers. Letters are inhabitants of thresholds. They connect the inside and the outside, the receiver and the sender, the past and the future. And as such, they defy binary opposites. And I end with women prisoners in Iran today. I talk about their courage to send these letters from within the prisons of the Islamic Republic. That, to me, it's an indication of how letters are indeed border crossers. If they can trespass these tall walls and these shuttered windows and these iron bars, and reach us on a rather large number, it speaks to the fact that, in fact, Jacques Lacan and Jacques Derrida's assertion can be reconciled in letters, and that they do both. Thank you.
Two questions. One is for Mrs. Safideh Mohammadian. Have you written the version of those books that you had originally written and saved them somehow so that they're expressions of, true expressions of what your intentions were? And the second one is anything with regard to the Armenian women in Iran, because I remember from my school days and times in Iran that they were fairly modern in terms of their practices.
First, I will answer. If I understand it well, you asked me if there is any original version of the novels that they censor them. Yes, of course, there is an original version of these novels. Actually, my first novels was about the Iranian family during this last 50 years. The exact concept of this novel. And the second novel, which is banned, names was The Assembly of Forgotten. So I mixed them and I put my manifest on this for my latest novel. But I changed the narration and story, and I put all of these people and some surreal atmosphere. And I used a lot of symbols, like there is a character, his name is Seyed, who killed her daughter because he's so religious, and something like that. And another character, which they are somehow they are thieves, not that's in a cliche, but they are. I tried to show every part of our society in this forgotten society, actually, and there is the original version of, for example, that novel, The Story of Eve, that I removed about 35 pages of this, but I think I just stand behind of this novel because I have to pay the price for the time that I wasn't that brave, and I
But
prefer.
I hope you save it or give it to the archives.
Of course, I saved them, all of them. That's like.
Thank you. Anything about the Armenian women in Iran from anyone? Any work done with them?
You know, I haven't worked on specifically on letters among the Armenian. I'm sure there is a lot there, but I know some wonderful colleagues such as Ms. Yaqubi, Claudia Yaqubi, has already published a letter about the Armenian community in Iran, and others are doing great work. And I have to say, one of the pioneers, merci, in the field of Iranian women's studies in this country is Elisa Nasaryan. Her work is truly magnificent. And she has worked on the role of women in the constitutional revolution, the roots of the Iranian women's movement, but she has also, in her second or third book, worked on Armenians in Iran. She's a great scholar and a pioneer.
Zoya Pirzad.
Zoya Pirzad is a novelist, of course. Yes, yes, yes. Thank
There's a
you.
program that the Iranian Studies is co-sponsoring, and I think in about a month and a half. It's about the role of Armenian women in Armenian art. So come and see.
Who have you invited?
There are two people. One of them is Talin.
Talinko.
And the other one is, I don't remember exactly.
Okay. But definitely Elisa Nasaryan will be
This is
fantastic.
about art.
Okay,
About
yeah.
art, not
Yeah.
about.
Yes.
Please. My question is for Professor Emerita on the Kate Millett archives. It was super interesting to hear, like, I feel like as a historian and archivist, like the worst thing to hear is that the like extra diegetic elements of an interview are like actually the real story, right? In this case, it sounds like the real value of that historical record wasn't her speaking about what she's seen, but things on the margin. And so I'm curious, like, what you took away from that in terms of if you're teaching somebody how to archive like a women's movement now, right? Like, what are the things we should be doing, especially if, like, you know, from my perspective, right? Like, I'm not an Iranian woman. In a planetary sense, I would be capturing, right, like a woman's movement, but I also am like an other as well. So, with that in mind, like, what did you take away from that you would want to pass on to like your students or documentarians, archivists, that we could be doing better to make sure that like we're not that person in the future who like try with every good intention. Tried to capture a movement, but made it more about ourselves than the movement.
Right, I mean, Kate Millett did write the book, and she did document the movement as a historian. It's not that was lacking. For me, the archive opened up the possibility, or the approach to the archive opened up a possibility that had been closed for me. Like, I couldn't go back to Iran to do research. And so what do I do with an already existing archive, right? And in this case, because I'm a media studies scholar, it was interesting to me to see what could I hear that would place me in the midst of the revolution and this movement that I was so fascinated by. I had been seen images of for, over 40 years. And see, could I put the voices of the women to the images that I saw? So I don't know that there is a writing of it, right? But there is an element of redemption here that I'm really interested in, of redeeming a past that was lost to Millet, and lost to us as well in that moment. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Can I just add a tiny bit to just that response, which is that, for instance, right after the 1979 revolution, a lot of the regressions just took place within the span of weeks. And many sort of raised the issue of like, why was it so easy and why was it so swift, right? And I think they ask this question because they don't know the true history of like the amount of resistance that was actually taking place, right? So I think you're completely right with like, we need to take a much more comprehensive look at all of these moments of resistance, including like the individual voices of protesters that are happening that sometimes we sort of ignore and we forget that, yeah.
I want to add one more thing, which was very critical to understand, is that, you know, we think about, there was a question here about social media as archive and, you know, YouTube as archive and so forth. I think that we forget that these technologies grow old and that they do not actually archive and preserve as we think. So at the time when Kate Millett and Sophie Keir were in Iran, they thought that their films were documenting that moment, right? Those films went to vinegar. They are no good anymore. They didn't turn into anything. And also Millett's cassette tapes really did not capture, everything. They missed so much. They were erased suddenly with the touch of a button. People disappeared, reappeared. And that also made the book writing interesting to me. Like, how do you write a book about this technology that disappears people and connects people and connects spaces and times?
May I add something, Ella? About archiving some part of the history that you said that sometimes we miss some part of this. I think archiving ordinary people's part of ordinary people's is very important because, for example, in my last novel, not this novel, but the novel that I'm working on this, I started to research about Kurdish people. And I talked to a lot of people that they fight for Kurd people, and also it calls Pishmerge, and every other people, some peoples in PKK, and Turks they say PKK, and at my research, when I went to the west of the Turkey and their cities that there's a lot of Kurdish people, I found that the real heroes and the real side of this fights, it's about the ordinary people. So I changed whole the story, and I changed my main character from the person who is like Pishmerge, someone is going to fight in the front of the war. I changed the main character to the very, very ordinary person, a very ordinary Kurdish person who wants to just have a good and normal life. So I think in Iran, we have this problem that we have a lot of stories and a lot of research about the, for example, intellectual women, women writers, and also educated women, but we don't have very good documents about the ordinary women. I think archiving the ordinary women's life is very, very important for the future. I tried to archive some ordinary lives in the Assembly of Forgotten because they are really ordinary people. But I think we need some research about the women's too. Thank you.
This question is for Safiya Mohammadian. You mentioned when you were in Iran as a writer for about 2 decades writing, you were subjected to the censorship system in Iran, and at times that amounted to you kind of agreeing to the censorship and making changes to your work. At other times it amounted to you censoring yourself. I'm just curious, as you have, I think, relatively recently migrated outside of Iran and continue to write, I believe, still in Persian, how has that process changed for you? How has that impacted your creative process? How has that changed your voice? And also, how has that impacted the way that you seek to connect with your audience, which I believe are still predominantly Persian speakers? I mean, sure, there are widespread and spread out across the globe, but I think the majority of Persian speakers are still in Iran. So how has that just changed your career process?
First of all, I have to say some quote of Shahrukh Maskoub. He say, "Vatan man zaban farsi ist," and he said, "My country is the Persian language," and I think so. I'm so happy that I had that chance, that being Persian and talking and thinking in Persian language. But after about 7 years that I left Iran, now I'm thinking that we need to somehow find another audience in another languages for showing our people's life to them. For example, about the Assembly of Forgotten, I translated this novel, not myself, because as you see, my English is not that much good, but I had translated, and I'm trying to find a good publisher because I wanted to show these images of Iranian people to the other audience. This is the part about the audience. But about the censorship, I have to say this is completely depends on your experience as a writer. I think every writer at the first of this path just wanted to have a good audience being seen. She wants to be seen, and she wants to be famous somehow. But after a while, when you are keep on in this way, you wanted to be a good storyteller, and for being a good storyteller, you should tell your own story. And in Iran, when you wanted to say your own story, you always feel that shadow of the censorship. Because after a while, you will learn, if I say this in this way, they will cut it. If I talk about, for example, for one of my novels, if even I talk about the dogs, they will cut it from the novel. So that's happened actually. So it needs, I think there is a twist in every story. And any of us as a writer, as an activist, has this twist. I had this twist when I left Iran because, I lost my hope actually at that time for Iran. And I thought that if I wanted to be original storyteller, I have to have that space for writing like that. Actually, I'm writing in Persian still, and I will try to publish them in Iran still, because this is our rights. I know that they never let me publish my novel in Iran anytime again, but I will try about this. And for now that we publish this out of Iran with good publishers like Mehri or Nakoja, there is the alternative now. There's some years that we have the other alternative. We try to communicate with Persian language speakers and readers in all over the world, but I believe that we should try our storytelling. I'm not a writer in Iran. We have to change our mind to try to make a good communication with the other languages. I think this is a problem about our writers. I think I try about this for now.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for sharing your thoughts and perspectives. I have a question for Dr. Tajali. Your argument, I'm going to stick to my script so I don't mess up.
Okay.
Your argument emphasizes the importance of transnational connection and networking as a response to the women's double bind in Iran, which I thought was really great. I'm curious if you conversate the arguments and ideas of diasporic Iranian feminists in your book, which I hope to read once the court ends.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. So I also identify myself as a transnational feminist. I'm actually, I do see a lot of value in sort of transnational cross-border exchange. And in fact, a big part of my new work is also looking into establishing more of an organic link between those within the diaspora and those within the country as well. And the reason for that is because, I mean, obviously, We know that although some might be within the diaspora, they're still recognizing that whatever's happening within the country is actually quite significant, while at the same time they may not be aware of what's happening, and vice versa, right? Those within the country also need to. So in fact, feminist solidarity, which has a very, very long and rich history, like as I said, like the suffrage movements across the world has often been very much cross-border, like even US and UK, right? Like there was a lot of organic sort of interactions and exchanges. So we need to see a little bit more fostering of that. Iran is particularly at the top of my list to sort of foster this exchange, because Iran, unfortunately, for the past 45 plus years, has been uniquely siloed, has been very much away from the international community, particularly, sort of feminist organizing movements. Like, as I said, like the role of these conferences was there. Maybe you could say it was symbolic, but at the same time, it showed the international community, like, oh, here are Iranian women, here are their demands, and then you at least had a seat at the table, right? Unfortunately, this has not been the case in recent times, or whenever there is a conference, you have sort of the spokespersons of the regime coming in, which again is sort of denying the heterogeneity in terms of sort of women's uprisings and feminism in there. So yes, that's definitely happening, particularly since the Women Life Freedom protests. There's been a renewed interest, because this was one of those moments where the diaspora really presented themselves as being extremely interested in seeing some change. So yes, the exchange is there, and of course within Iran as well, thanks to social media, thanks to sort of the interest that's also happening, and the failures of the state, we see sort of more and more connections happening.
To go back, am I allowed to?
Yes, please.
To go back to your wonderful comparison of the suffragette movement in Iran and in Turkey. Have you studied other religious minorities that had given the right to vote to women? And women voted on a large scale in Iran before it happened in Turkey?
That's right. So are you talking about the Azerbaijan local elections? And
that's one. The Babis and the Baha'is in particular. All the women were voting.
Yes.
I don't know about other religious minorities, but to say that it was Ataturk who did it the first in the Middle East area, I don't think is necessarily historically correct. There were pockets, not all, but there were pockets of women, you mentioned one, I mentioned another one, who were able to vote.
Yes, I meant at the national level. So to recognize it at the national level, it was the first within the region. But yes, you're absolutely correct that so as I said, like the demand for suffrage dates back to definitely to the 1800s, where we have public records of women sort of demanding this political right. During the Constitutional Revolution, it just became more prominent because many of them sort of were writing and discussing it more. But yes, it goes back to that. And I would say that's true with regardless of where we look, where it sometimes takes about, sometimes close to a century before even women's political rights are recognized. And also, even the way we talk about this right is really significant, because I always say, like, the right being recognized, which means that obviously it's a fundamental human right. Like, you're born with the right to be able to make decisions on your behalf, right? It's just the time of, like, when does the state or the authority, in terms of the modern nation states, recognizes this right? I fully disagree with the discussion of granting the right, which some people, it's like, the monarch came and granted this right. So it's like, no. It was just recognized because it should have been recognized at the dawn of history, but it wasn't, and yeah.
Okay, so this is the last question because we're running.
And I have one comment after.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm interested in your thoughts about why, in Iran, the women's struggle, suffrage starts in the 1800s, especially in 1911, and then it continues till 1963. And the Shiite religion, the mullahs, the ulama, always push back. Whereas in Turkey, it happens before, and there's not so much pushback. Is it especially a feature of Shiite ulama Islam, or is it a particular male chauvinism in Iran? What are your thoughts about it? Why have we had so much struggle for so long?
Yeah, I can try to briefly try to understand. So there's some unique similarities and differences between Iran and Turkey. While they do share some commonalities, but there are some important differences between. I'm sorry?
They're Sunnis. They're not
Right. So one thing that is quite prominent within, and so the double bind that I talked about within the Iranian context was quite unfortunate, where you did have male political elites that discussed women's, modern Iranian women. I don't like to say liberating women, because liberation was not necessarily part of the agenda, but it was like modern Iranian women who's very, she's present within the public sphere, right? She's educated, she's there. But they were willing to, at the same time, sort of sacrifice this right for other political interests that they had. What's unique with Mustafa Kemal Ataturk is that he did rise as a general, and he was able to take power in the way that he did, that he just had a lot of the support among the elites, that he was just able to sort of very forcefully go ahead and do this. So the way the structures and the negotiations that were happening at the elite level was quite different. I think that's why I use the example of the first half of Shah, that it could have been very similar. It didn't happen. I'm pretty sure Dr. Milani can probably elaborate a little bit more on this as well.
I can recount the conversation, actually, literally, between Ataturk and Reza Shah. And Ataturk says we should make some changes. He says to Ataturk, first of all, you inherited an empire. I inherited a failed state. You have enlightened clergy. I have reactionary mullahs. I'm verbatim quoting.
Okay. I just remembered another name which answers two questions. One is Shirin Do. Shirin was a pre-Islamic woman, wife of Khosrow Parviz, and then she was an Armenian woman.
Yeah.
So just added to the
Thank you so much.
list.
Thank you very much for your patience and time.